Welcome, everyone, to this poetry interview or Poetry X Hunger. I am so pleased to have Vaughn Diaz here with us today to talk about her incredibly important, groundbreaking work in bringing the arts to social justice causes. Vaughn is an Emmy award-winning documentarian and food historian and author of a couple of books, one being Eyeless, Iceless,
Islas.
Islas, a celebration of tropical cooking, which will be published in 2024, and Coconuts and Collards, recipes and stories from Puerto Rico to the Deep South. She was born in Puerto Rico and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. She explores food culture, memory, and ancestry. In addition to her debut culinary memoir and forthcoming book, she's contributed recipes and essays to a number of cookbooks and anthologies. Just look at her website, it's pretty impressive. Her work, in fact, has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Bon Appetit, National Public Radio, Food and Wine magazine, a magazine called Eater, a Condé Nast Traveler, and Epicurious. She's also been a reporter for National Public Radio, StoryCorps, The Splendid Table, and a number of other radio platforms. So it's really an honor, pleasure to have Vaughn here today. Welcome, Vaughn.
Thank you, Hiram. Thank you for inviting me.
We had the good fortune of working together on a panel a few months back where we were talking about both what's happening and what might happen in the future with this notion of bringing the arts, yes, the arts, into social justice work. And you made such wonderful, terrific points there. Did you want to start off by saying anything in general about your approach? And then I've got a couple of specific questions that I wanted to check in with you about.
Sure. And thanks again for inviting me. It's lovely to share space with you again. Um, for me, and I think this is maybe true for a lot of documentarians, sort of contemporary documentarians and folks of my generation. Um, we live in a multimedia landscape, right? And this, I think, is a bit distinct from the generation of journalists and documentarians before me, where the capability to record, to photograph, was just different, right? We had different tools. But today, and those of us who are producing today have so many tools at our disposal. And sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming, but for me, I think it gives, all of the tools that we have at our disposal provide so many opportunities for looking at things differently, right? And in particular, in terms of sort of the artistry that goes into any kind of production, right? So in my case, I'm an author, so I work on books, and I also, write for digital publications, and I produce radio, right? So I sort of work in these three fields of physical book production,
Mm-hmm.
a thing you touch, a tangible object, digital copy, right, which is often interspliced with, in addition to ads, of course, there's the photography and illustration, and and you can sort of make things move on the page to amplify the experience. And then audio, right, which is an immersive storytelling experience that is also singular, right? It's just coming into your ears. And so for me, as a multimedia producer and documentarian, all of those things fuel the way that I see the story unfold.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes I find that my writing starts with a description of a thing, right? So I tend to open any essay or chapter that I'm writing with some kind of visual description. Um, and this came to me. I can give you an example from my forthcoming book that you so kindly mentioned earlier, which comes out in March, although it's available for pre-order, and it's called Islas, Celebration of Tropical Cooking. So I'm going to read just a little segment of the
Sure.
opening of the chapter about the Seychelles, which is the second chapter in my book, and I'll talk a little bit about it later. But the second chapter in my book, which is about pickling, and it's focused on the islands of the Seychelles. So I write, the flavors of Seychelles are a sensorial symphony: vanilla, nutmeg, cinnamon, pepper, pineapple, coconut, soursop, jackfruit, bilimbi, a miniature sour cucumber, abundant fresh greens, eggplant, yams, taro, cassava, fish, clams, mackerel, and shark. Salty, sweet, bitter, sour, and often quite spicy, the cuisine bears the marks of settlers, the enslaved and migrants alike, including French, British, Spanish, African, Chinese, and Indian. Curry is abundant, as are chutneys, pickles, and peppery sauces. Lasos pimam, also known as chili to locals, is fiery and tangy, a blend of onions, tomatoes, lemon juice, bilimbi, and a ton of red hot chilies. So that chapter
Mm.
opener, I think, is a really good representation of
Yes.
how I write.
Yes.
And I'm also finding that it's also a good representation of how I make audio stories as well.
Mm.
Because, you know, we all have a style, right? Every creator has a style. And my goal, I think a lot of times, is to almost bombard you with sensory information in such a way that you get kind of transported
Mm.
into an experience,
Hmm.
right? Into a sensory experience. Because
Hmm.
I'm very interested in the kind of the physicality of food,
Mm.
right? So how does food smell, taste, touch? How does it feel in your body?
And the underlying
Uh,
culture of that food as well, and the
exactly.
importance of that. I don't know if anyone has ever told you or not, Vaughn, but you are a poet, in case you didn't realize it. That section that
Thank
you
you.
read
I'm
there
honored.
could have definitely have been a poem. I think it's the crossroads that you represent of so many of the various arts, and bringing those to the social justice cause or causes that I think I find, and I'm sure a lot of other folks find, just so incredibly important, significant, and really attractive. What out of all of that work that you've done across those many arts has been most kind of gratifying to you, either personally or in terms of overall social impact that you think you've had?
Hmm. So I feel really fortunate in my life and career to have a really strong social justice foundation, which I absorbed very much from my mother, and also I would say my grandmother. They were both people who were of service to others in various ways, in big ways and in small ways as well. And so I was a Girl Scout and would
Mhm.
volunteer quite a bit to do cleanups, and also to read to elders and things of that nature. And so that kind of early foundation. I'm also, you know, I'm Puerto Rican, and spent a lot of time going back and forth between you know, low income neighborhoods in Atlanta, which is where I grew up, to you know, to some very different kinds of places in Puerto Rico. And the foundation of social justice initially took me in the direction of being a social justice advocate. I started my career providing services for women survivors of violence,
Mm.
and found within that work that being on the ground with trauma survivors was not something I could emotionally handle.
Mm.
And that was a difficult but meaningful lesson, because it drove me to storytelling.
Mhm.
And I found, much to my surprise, when I actually started writing, I came to journalism a little later in life than a lot of folks. I was in my 30s already. Um, I found that I was learning and exploring a craft as a way to articulate a reality.
Mm.
And I had never thought of myself as a writer, ever, honestly. I love to read. I was a, voracious reader as a kid. But I never ever imagined myself as a writer, and I didn't use that word to describe myself. And I think it's because when I started writing, as my potential future career or craft, I wanted to write about things that I had seen and that I had experienced. And so much of what I had seen in my own childhood, but also what I had seen in my efforts to be an advocate for social justice, I found that I wanted my writing to evoke emotion,
Hmm.
because when, for example, I worked in homeless shelters and also volunteered in homeless shelters, and the visceral experience of being in a homeless shelter or being in community with people who were houseless, right?
Hmm.
It's an incredibly visceral experience. There's a lot of emotion going on. There's a power dynamic, right, between you and the houseless person. There's whatever it is that's going on with them. There are the objects that people carry with them from one place to another that are significant to them. And so I found myself in my earliest writing wanting to paint a picture of what I saw.
Hmm.
And so that's what I think is really meaningful and really powerful about having an artistic lens when you're working on social justice work, because when it comes to news, right, to know what's going on, we can look to places like Reuters and the Associated Press
Hmm.
to learn what
Hmm.
happened that day, who were
Hmm.
the actors, what was the outcome. But pulling people into a
Yes,
human
yes,
experience,
yes,
which I think is needed for accomplishing any level of
yes.
social justice, right? We need to relate to what's happening. That, I believe, really requires a level of artistry, of being evocative, of pinpointing, right? What is the example of what is the thing that's gonna stand out to someone who maybe doesn't know anything about this community,
Mm.
or potentially doesn't care yet about this
The
community.
community. Yeah,
Yeah, and so
look,
you just keep trying, and evoking.
I couldn't agree more. I often make the case in the poetry frame that why and the hunger poetry that speaks back to hunger, that we need all the hunger data, trend line. We
Hmm.
need all the scientists working on the problem as well. We need all the statistics, but those simply do not engage the public, you and me, in the same way as a poem, a really evocative poem can.
Hmm.
We need all of those tools in the
Hmm.
toolkit. And for too long, in the case of at least poetry, and I'd even suggest maybe some of the arts, there just haven't been those kind of creative tools in the toolkit. But you're helping provision that toolkit. Um, in the interest of time, I want to, because I know you're very, very busy, I wanted to just kind of quickly check in with you about, yes, what's on your horizon personally, I mean, professionally, what you're looking at, but even more generally, can you speak for just a moment about where you think this whole field of arts, social justice, the kind of work, integrative work that you've been doing, where do you see it going in the next 5 to 10 years? And then we'll finish with that very open-ended kind of question. Is there anything else, Vaughn, that you would like to discuss or visit about before we drop off?
Sure. I feel very hopeful about the future of sort of creative, of art being used as a tool for social change, because I think the generation behind me and the one behind them, young people today are so plugged in to aesthetics, right? It just their generation is a very visual. They have a
Hmm.
very visual culture. And so I think that what may have been perhaps unusual about my own arrival into this
Hmm.
space or my own interest in art, I think that what I'm seeing in young people is that they are very interested in making everything artful and beautiful. And of course, I can't speak for all the young people on the planet, right? But that's what I'm seeing and what I
Hmm.
saw when I was teaching at UNC Chapel Hill. A lot of my students, gosh, they would just pull things together that were so creative.
Hmm.
And I think that the what something that I'm noticing too for younger generations are really encouraged to know themselves,
Mm.
and so the much more so than my generation. And so the what I'm seeing in young people is that they, in knowing themselves, what they put out in the world is so unique because it is an
Mm.
expression of a unique
Mm.
individual.
Individual. Yeah.
And so I have a lot of hope. I think also that what is evolving is that it isn't sort of in terms of sort of social justice and how it can contribute, how art can contribute to hunger causes, right? I think that when I was growing up, I remember my introduction to hunger in other places was videos and still photography of children in Ethiopia.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
I remember
Mhm.
it so clearly. And
Yes.
these commercials would come up on public
Yeah.
television. And I would look at these poor children who were emaciated and often I remember, just eating kernels of rice with flies on them. It was a really disturbing image. It was meant to, and it was true, and it was
Hmm.
meant to shock us,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And it was meant to shock us into action. I think that today there's more nuance, right? There's a more of a consciousness that we don't have to um uh you know we can preserve a person's humanity, integrity, and strength, and also demonstrate the ways in which they have need,
Yes.
and not sort of and forgive the use of this term, but be pornographic
Right.
about need,
Right. Right.
right? Of going a little bit over the top in ways that actually strips the individual of their agency
Exploits.
in the
Right.
moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I would say. I'm very hopeful, and I'm seeing a lot of really interesting examples of how folks are just bringing social justice into everything they do.
Everything. I think your points about that young people today are visually inclined for sure, and then know themselves and are unapologetic about knowing themselves. And they bring that honesty and forthrightness to bear. And this last point, too, about the creative process is absolutely the case. Is there anything else, Vaughn, that you're itchy to tell viewers who might be tuning in with an interest in this case, poetry and hunger? Anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
Please check out Islas, the celebration of tropical cooking.
Good.
I'm very, very proud of this book. And I'm proud of it because it's a beautiful book. It's a cookbook. There's gorgeous recipes. But I spent 2 years
Mhm.
studying the food cultures of tropical island communities across the planet. And what I came away with, and what is articulated in this particular book, is that islanders have so much in common and are some of the most vulnerable communities on
Mhm.
this planet.
Mhm.
And I am not a scientist, but I know a tremendous amount about climate change and the forecasted impacts of climate change on the world's most vulnerable
Mhm.
people. And so, I encourage folks to check out my work in that area because it's new for me, and it's emerging. And this, I hope, will be the first of many projects that uses this kind of methodology to
Right.
explore food and culture. And one additional plug from the other side of my life, right, from my
Good.
radio life, is I'm a senior producer at StoryCorps. We're the nation's largest oral history project, the largest collection of human voices on the planet. And every week we broadcast a piece on NPR's Morning Edition. It's typically what folks know us for. Those pieces are, especially for this community that might be listening or watching, those pieces are poems. We think of them as
Sure,
poems.
sure.
And they are the folks that I work with are just really some of the most brilliant journalists that I've had the privilege of working with, who are looking in every corner of the United States to express and explore the realities of people that we don't typically hear from in
Mm-hmm.
all of their permutations, right? And really see experience as all another definition of diversity, right? Like certainly race, ethnicity, culture, geography, but also experience.
Mm.
And so, for a weekly poetry audio fix that isn't called a poem,
Right.
yeah, check us out on Morning Edition on
Well,
Friday.
everyone who's viewing this will be able to get those links. We'll see the links in the cover note to this video. So please check that out as you're viewing the video. Vaughn, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out to visit with us, provide some of your insights. I could visit with you for a lot longer.
I feel the same. I
So
feel the
maybe
same,
we can
Hiram.
do a part two at some point
You
down the
got
road.
it.
But at this point, really do thank you and wish you very well moving forward in all of the avenues that you're trailblazing for us all. So thank you
Thank you.
again and take care.
Thank you, Hiram. Appreciate you.
Take care.